Thanks a lot. And yeah, as Angie said, I'm still kind of waiting for the day where they say, oh, you have more time than expected to talk today. So we'll see if that happens one day. Just going to get set up here, make sure you have you guys on my big screen here. And then start the presentation. Now, I hate looking at myself on Spotlight and like looking at the gallery. So if you could turn your camera on, if at all possible, I love talking to people's faces and would really appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. It somehow reduces my anxiety when I can see some visual feedback. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about sustainability and spread planning, and I am going to make sure you get your lunch on time. I've got my handy dandy timer here. We've got about 33 minutes left, so won't keep you longer than that. So I was thinking even about the title of this, and maybe in QI language, we should be talking more about like implementation sustainability, and then spread. Maybe we're not, we can mention spread, but at this point, I think we're a little early in the journey to be thinking about spread, although we are doing some idea exchange with this collaborative itself, which may be informally spreading some of the improvements that you're making. So disclosures, these haven't changed. It's pre-pandemic travel related, so travel for conferences. We want to talk about this journey from testing changes. I loved some of the learnings. Start small, it's great that that is sinking in, and moving small scale to large to implement to sustaining and then maybe spreading. And then we can talk about components of an implementation plan. All right, so I want to do this first though. So if you open the chat box, and I know some of you guys are there as a group, so you could list several here. I just want you to, without pressing enter, think of something, a change you've made either personally or professionally that didn't stick, that you haven't sustained. Okay, you put it in the chat, but don't press enter. Okay, and you can put several there. I'll give you about 30 seconds to do that. I always forget to have the Jeopardy music queued up for this moment, but all right. So, oh, Andrew, you hit enter. Right. All right.
Andrew, do you really do lunchtime workouts? Come on. No.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a good example. So it's a safe space here. You don't have to press enter if you don't want to, but how about everybody just at once? Let's press enter and see what we get here. All right, so we've got daily work. Okay, more workouts here. It's an intake form. I'm losing it here. Intake form, targeted delivery. Okay, personal, not getting kids out of the door on time. Okay, weekly yoga, taking breaks, collecting data in person, not taking breaks. Okay, some common themes there. All right, well, whatever you were thinking or whatever you put down, hopefully you can take something away from this presentation to maybe make it stick the next time. Either personal or professional things, it works in both areas. I took this quote from one of our improvement consultants who helped with Provincial Boost. He said that when the words end and sustain are used in the same sentence, they're at war with each other. Just to say that Boost isn't ending, okay? We're not wanting to think of this as a project ending, but I think of it more as we're thinking of shifting to sustainment mode. And because Boost was so short for you guys in interior, I would even say, hopefully it's not entering the sustainment mode yet, but we've just got you going on your improvement journey. Okay, so we're going to talk, Andrew and I are going to talk later in the day about some ideas for supporting you to keep that journey going. Does anybody know what Parkinson's law is? So I literally just made this slide a minute ago because I was pulling this together. But it's basically the idea that the work fills the time allotted to do it, okay? So, and corollaries of this, work complicates to fill the available time. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute to do. And alternatively, work contracts to fit in the time we give it. So this idea, we need to think of when we're thinking about how to sustain things, because the number one way to sustain QI efforts is to get QI embedded in your workday, okay? To make sure you have time in your day to get things done. And it doesn't mean it has to be a lot of time. And, you know, I use this timer for other things. It's like, okay, if I do 10 minutes of Chinese studying a day, it's like a small amount that's not going to affect my other work in the week because it's such a small percentage, but the compounding effects of doing that small amount each day can give you massive improvements over time. Okay, so if you remember one thing from this talk, it's that, so here's your Tasmanian devil sort of clinic, the whirlwind we're in most of the week. That's a depiction of your weekly schedule. Parkinson's law, it's going to fill the time allotted. But if you protect a bit of time in your day, in your week, to do focused quality improvement work, it will change how this whirlwind feels week to week. The whirlwind will get better week to week. And the work fills the time allotted, right? So if you take a sliver of your week and do the QI in it reliably, I think that's the best path forward. All right, I've got a few resources I emailed to the listserv last night. So this one I put together with some guidance on implementation. So once your change ideas are ready to implement, you can use this. It's a fillable PDF. So you can hover over the different areas and see information of what you can put in there. And then some useful links there as well. Also, the BC Patient Safety Quality Council has a good slide deck for teaching quality improvement, including this planning for sustainability worksheet, which has a pretty exhaustive list of questions you can think about when you're thinking about how to sustain the improvements that you've made. So here's your, I was thinking when he showed that bike, straight line bike start to finish versus the, you know, peaks and valleys. The peaks and valleys really look more like BC and like the interior that you're in anyway, but also the QI journey. But here, you know, a major gap that we see, we're great at coming up with ideas, and then sometimes we'll say, you know, that's a perfect idea and jump right to implementation and without testing. That's dangerous. Alternatively, we test things, but then don't do the implementation steps, so we don't get them to stick. And most of the time, we don't even test the ideas. We just keep doing what we've always been doing and don't have time to adapt and improve. And again, that's why you need the quality improvement embedded in your workday. So it's not just every so often. All right, so I'm going to skip that. So major gap between what we know and what we do. So we know there are a bunch of new treatment options. We know we can connect better with pharmacies. We know that outreach works for our most marginalized. How often are we able to test all these ideas and get them into what we do reliably? So we have this large gap, this no-do gap, and it's hard to get what we know into what we do if we don't have a way of testing and adapting and growing. And that's, again, getting embedded quality improvement as part of your day. If you want to hear me go on about this for about a 9-minute read, I put a link in that email that really, I try to make a case of why this is important. And if we don't do it, things may just get worse for us because we've got, things like big data and more research. So what does that do? It gives us more guidance of how we can do things better, but no time to actually shift to that way of doing things better. So we need that mechanism to grow at the front line. A good example of this, Moderna came up with their vaccine in 2 days. That was well-publicized story, but think about the implementation and how much harder that was, and how hard it still is in certain areas, right? So often it's not the knowledge itself, it's the implementation of what we know works, okay? And, this is an old slide, but it's still an issue of implementation of a vaccine that we know works. I have examples from my own EMR and how strong a status quo can be. So even if you know a better way of doing something, our brains just follow patterns that we're used to. So I, at one point, figured out a much easier way, like 1 click instead of 10 clicks to book a follow-up appointment. Fast forward 2 months, and I was doing it the old way. Right. And then I completely forgot about that because I was just so well trained. If I had taken some implementation steps, may have avoided slipping back to that status quo. Similarly, let's skip that example for time, but yeah, implementation can steps and having a plan for implementation can prevent you from doing this very understandable human error of sticking to status quo. And even if in the back of our mind we do know that another way is better, we don't do it because it's not what we're used to. I thought of this just on my drive to work the other day. I figured, I could cut 2 minutes off the very last bit of my drive to the clinic. And then a week later, I'm doing it the old way again. And then thinking, oh, why didn't I change that? How can I make that stick? All right, so the key here is you want to take steps to actually implement the change and make it stick. So difference between testing and implementation. Testing is not permanent, but implementation, we're wanting to make things routine. You want to start thinking about supporting processes around it, because this is something that's going to be part of the way you do things now, the ongoing work. You want to, so in testing, it's okay for the test to fail, and that's learning as well, but you want to be pretty confident that you're getting improvement if you're implementing a change permanently. You expect failure, that's what I just said. And implementation can take more time than testing, and you'll kind of see why as we talk about different parts of an implementation plan. And, if you are implementing, especially well beyond the initial team who was testing the changes, you may encounter some more resistance because people haven't been brought along that journey and been able to believe in the change idea that you have been testing. So we've seen this ramp many times. You're going from small scale to large scale to implementation. Okay. Why can't you just implement already? So I think I've mentioned this example before. We all remember where we switched the formulary from methadone to methadose. Pharmacologically equivalent, shouldn't have been a problem. Let's just do it on a massive scale. But in reality, it wasn't tested, and this destabilized many people. And so it's just a point, don't implement something on a massive scale without testing it on small scale first. When is something ready to implement? You've tested it with multiple cycles, PDSA cycles. You've got a pretty good degree of belief. You've got some readiness for change in your organization, and you're pretty sure that the cost or risk of failure is small. If you don't have all these factors, what do? Just keep doing more PDSAs. You can build all of these with more PDSAs. And here's what's in an implementation plan. Okay, so these are key categories you can think about to really make your changes stick. So if you were thinking of, so Andrew, maybe your lunchtime workouts, are there things here that you could standardize? Is there a plan that you could document? Are you measuring how often you're doing these lunchtime workouts? How are you communicating that to yourself, to others? Do you need any additional training or orientation on how to do that well? And do you have the resources? Do you have the physical space? Do you have the virtual coach or whatever it may be? So planning out all these things, you can imagine that your likelihood of success in doing that over time would be much higher. And with these, you can do a PDSA approach as well. For example, if you came up with a training video, maybe just make a quick first script, get some feedback on it. That's a PDSA cycle in itself, right? Standardization. So this is you're coming up with specific policies and practices. And you're trying to reduce variability and increase predictability and get everybody on the same page, shared understanding and expectations, but beware of over standardizing. I think I've seen this in health authority where any local innovation and change is kind of stifled because the idea is that we need every clinic to be doing the exact same thing. So be mindful, only use standardization where you think it's going to be beneficial. Documentation, I think all of us don't document these things enough. We have so much tacit knowledge, so that knowledge that exists in our team's heads, but not down on paper. Which works fine for a time, but then it degrades as staff turnover happens or the team grows. So getting more of this stuff documented can be really helpful in the long term, even though I know it is not particularly fun in the short term. It is important, and not saying to document everything in long form. It's probably better anyway to just have a concise summary of key decisions and those sorts of agreements. User guides to things, videos, and don't just do it once, but say, when are we actually going to refresh this information? It's more of a process than a single document creation. So I like this startup. I've read this guy's books and the idea of these documents being a process instead of just a thing you do once, but it's actually getting an agreement you have with your team of how you're going to do something, how you're going to work together. Getting that down on paper, getting everybody to agree that, yes, this is how we work together. And then saying, as part of that, we're going to review this as a team in 6 months to say, is there any way we can improve this, or is this still up to date? And then new people come in, they can actually review these documents. So I'm trying to set this up with our team at Hope to Health right now. And Angie's been seeing a lot of this lately, but we're trying to get down more of this information on paper. And you'd see this one I posted was just even our daily habits. So like, what do we do as a team in the morning? How are we communicating? Some notes about breaks, expectations like that. So coming up with a process of posting a draft, getting the team to review it, consenting to it, and then making that available. So measurement, you want to ideally shift from quality improvement once you've improved to a state of quality control, because you want your improvements to stick. How will you know they've stuck if you stop measuring completely? You don't want to likely don't want to measure as often or make it as labor intensive, but you still want to keep an eye on things and maybe have a threshold to intervene. And this is another reason why having an embedded QI team is really helpful, because then you have that capacity to respond if things do start to slip. So this is the idea of going from individual QI projects to a more total quality management strategy, meaning that you're continuously doing this and it's not just one project and done. So we've done this at Hope to Health with our disengagement QI work. We continue to measure the percent of disengaged clients, and a few times have re-intervened as it looked to start being start going up again. You want to communicate what you've done, why the change is happening, and make sure that, you know, I've got my phone here. It's drawing a bit of my attention right now. We're constantly distracted. You need to make your communication plan catchy, clear, multimodal, you know, be creative, have fun with it. And don't just do it once, but over time, multiple ways. That is a better way to make your changes stick. Okay, so websites, Twitter, maybe not Twitter anymore, but whatever you think. And you can think about this as a continuum between just sharing information to actually shaping behavior. So the behavior being more the face-to-face, one-on-one mentoring, shadowing. Communicate not just primary benefits, but other benefits. So we've heard a few of these, like I think it was Rebecca increased her Excel skills. So that wasn't the primary outcome, but it's still good to communicate out these other wins. Okay, for me, this was from my weight loss example, and here's your dad joke, because I increased the number of runs I was taking in a month. So that's my run chart. Yes. Training videos can be very helpful and a useful resource. I had these ones for the OUD form that will put you to sleep really quickly as well, and communicating a secondary benefit of that. And resources, make sure you have the right staff, the leadership engaged, the physical space, the technology. Having that all planned out will increase your likelihood of success. Also, I think we've heard a bit of this before too. So the changes that are most likely to stick are the ones that are highly adoptable. Highly adoptable just meaning that after the initial point of doing the change, the hump of getting used to it, the workload doesn't really increase much, okay? So you want to find those changes where it's really light or even decreasing workload, but also improving quality. Skip this. And so we want to shift our mindset here, right? We want to shift from an old system where at the end of our project, we'd say we met our goals, we assume things will hold, we can only do one QI project at a time, we can't maintain things, we don't have infrastructure. How do we shift to this system where we need to plan for holding the gains? We start the planning early. It's an expectation, like, why are we doing this if we're not planning to sustain it after? We want to integrate into existing systems where we can. We want to know some of the simple steps, so that's that implementation plan I just went over. And we're more equipped to take on the next QI project, right? The first one is always the most difficult, as the learning curve is steep. And I think, Rebecca, you were expressing some of that. The real tension at the beginning of not feeling like you don't know what you're doing. I would flip that and say, when it is hard like that, that's a good sign that you're learning a lot at that point, right? That like struggle. It's like when you're lifting a heavy weight, probably your muscle is growing the most. So keep that in mind. And I also took this from the other guy in Boost who talked about sustainment, and it's about this no-do gap. So we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act. So not an act we do once, or it's not just something we know, but it's a habit. It's what we do day to day over time that we sustain that really defines us.